So welcome everybody to, what are we calling this, Derek? We said law school admissions A to Z, right? So, oh my gosh, someone from New York. That is so cool. I love it. Hey, Adrian. Okay, that's awesome. So Derek, and I'm very excited about this webinar, and I really appreciate Derek and Estuardo taking their time on a Saturday morning and dressing up. Look at how nice they look in their jacket and tie and button down. I appreciate it. So Derek is currently a partner with the Spivey Consulting Group. So this is a group of, I think, Derek, correct me if I'm wrong, everyone is a former admissions person. Is that right? Uh-oh, Derek?
Sorry, I was muted. Yes, all former admissions officers.
So he has more than 20 years of experience in law school admissions and legal recruiting. He has served as Dean of Admissions and Financial Aid for UPenn Law School. He was the recruiting manager for the law firm Paul Hastings, and he was an admissions reader for Chicago Law School. Derek is a first-generation college student from rural Ohio, a member of the LGBTQ community. He was very successful in increasing racial, sexual orientation, and socioeconomic diversity at Penn Law, and in helping to launch diversity scholarships at Paul Hastings. He has also served as a career mentor and writing coach to first-generation applicants in LA. He holds a JD from Capital University and his college degree in journalism from Ohio University. So, Derek, take it away. If you want me to share the screen yet, let me know.
Okay, I'll let you know. Thanks, Cindy. Good morning, everyone, or afternoon. I guess we have some people from the East Coast too. So I always love doing these, so I'm really happy to be here. I know that this process can be incredibly overwhelming. There are a lot of moving parts to it, and many of which take months sometimes to prepare for and to complete. So part of what I want to do is just give you an overview of everything that you will have to do. And what I did was I actually put together a checklist. And Cindy, you can put that up on the screen. You can, well, we'll figure this out later, but I also want you to be able to have these handouts. So we'll figure out a way that we can email those to you later. But basically, this checklist lists every piece of the application process that you'll have to complete. And I also included on there the links that will take you right to the Law School Admission Council website that takes you through the steps there to actually complete these processes. So that's actually a great place to start, because all of this essentially has to be done through the Law School Admission Council, or LSAC. So if you haven't explored their website or heard much about them yet, they will become, for better or for worse, a big part of your life over the next year. So LSAC, why are they so important? Basically, this is the organization that administers the LSAT, the law school admission test that you'll have to take for admission. They also serve as the clearinghouse for you and for all the law schools, which means they collect and distribute the elements of your application, and they provide the platform through which you will actually apply to the schools. So when you complete your applications, you're doing this all through the accounts that you'll create on LSAC. So you're not actually applying directly to the schools. It's all going through the Law School Admission Council. So basically, the first thing on that checklist is the most important. You'll want to create your LSAC account so that you can start exploring the website and starting the process for all of these steps. Now, they also have a lot of great information on their website too, by the way, lots of resources and tips for studying for the LSAT and reaching out to schools and how to get information on them. So there's a lot of information on that website. So that is definitely the first place that you want to start. Now, the next thing I have on the checklist, I actually just put in there in red, is about fee waivers. And the reason I have that right there is because, as you will soon find out, this is a really expensive process applying to law schools. Just taking one LSAT test costs $200. And then you also have to pay for them to send the report of your LSAT and other materials to each school that you apply to. There's also a fee just to use their services. So basically, these costs really add up. And but the good news is, if you are someone for whom this would be a financial burden, you can actually apply for a fee waiver. And I put that right at the top there because that is something that you would need to do 4 to 6 weeks prior to the registration deadline for when you want to take the LSAT. So so again, this is all part of the planning process. It's really important to have an idea of when you're going to do these things and how long it's going to take. So that's just something to keep in mind, that if you want to apply for those fee waivers, you're going to need to do it well in advance. And then if you actually get a fee waiver, you will get, I believe it's 2 free LSAT tests and a number of free reports to send to your schools. So it could save potentially a lot of money. So that's the next thing on the checklist. And then we actually get to the LSAT itself, which of course is that wonderful test that everyone has to take. Now, I should note just really quickly that the GRE is an option for some schools. So it doesn't necessarily have to be the LSAT. But the one thing to keep in mind about that is not all schools accept the GRE. I think it's about 60 accredited law schools right now that accept it. So just a side note on that, because sometimes I get questions about that. But most people are going to take the LSAT. So that's what we're going to focus on. Now,
Derek, can I I'm sorry.
Of course,
Derek, can I interrupt you just really quick for there? Are there, I'm assuming because the GRE is new in the last couple of years, is there any data yet on whether students are doing better on the GRE versus the LSAT?
I actually don't know the answer to that question. I don't know if Estuardo has any insight, but what I will say is, based on anecdotal experience, I'm finding it actually more challenging for students who take the GRE. It seems to be a bit of a higher bar. And
Okay.
I suppose that part of that is that the LSAT has just been around for so long. It was designed specifically for law school. That's what law schools are most familiar with. And so I think maybe there's still there are still unknowns about the GRE. The other thing that is a significant factor, to be honest, is the US News rankings, right? I mean, a lot of how schools are ranked are driven by their LSAT and GPA medians. And I think it's still a little unclear how much the GRE factors into that. So I think it's still kind of in process, so to speak, right? Like we don't know exactly, but I do know that at least, again, anecdotally, what I'm seeing is it seems to be a bit harder. My clients that I've worked with who have only taken the GRE, I would say they've not had as many options in the end as those who take the LSAT.
Yeah, I agree. At UCI, anecdotally also, like this is only our second year taking the GRE, but from what we have seen in what we've been doing so far with the GRE is that it's not really helpful in the way I think students are. You know, it's still a test, and the same issues that arise with the LSAT arise with the GRE. So it's not really advantageous, and if anything, it's limiting, because now you're only able to apply to schools that have a GRE or that take the GRE. And in most cases, if you have both of the scores, the default is still the LSAT. So it's not like you can take one and ask, oh, look at my GRE, not my LSAT. If you have both scores, schools will always count the LSAT anyway.
Okay.
Great question.
you.
And please interrupt me throughout, because I'd rather I'd rather you do that than me just talking for 40 minutes straight.
Okay.
So please, by all means. Okay, so yeah, so back to the LSAT. So it's offered about 9 or 10 times a year. So plenty of options, almost monthly. One of the biggest changes is with COVID, it is now being offered online. So you take it from home, and it's 3 sections, which includes logical reasoning, analytical games, reading comprehension. So 1 section each of those. It's about a 2-hour exam now. At least as of right now, we know that through April of 2021, that they're going to continue offering it. It's actually called the LSAT Flex, is the name of the new version of it, the new online take it home version. So yes, it remains to be seen whether this will become the standard, and if they will just keep doing this permanently, even post COVID, which hopefully will be soon. But at least as of now, that's what we have. So you have plenty of options to take it. What I would say is this is an important, I think, date to keep in mind. I usually recommend that people try to apply by Thanksgiving. I think that's a good deadline to have in the back of your head. The reason for that is most law schools make decisions on a rolling basis. So you will see, for example, that their admission deadline may not actually be until March 1st or April 1st, sometimes even later. So yes, it's totally fine to apply in the winter or spring. You can still do that, but you could be at a disadvantage. So, and because we are almost a year ahead of next Thanksgiving, assuming all of you are applying for next cycle, you have plenty of time to plan for this. So that's just a really good goal to aim for. So what that means is, as far as the LSAT goes, I would say you want to try to take it no later than August or September, if the goal is to apply by Thanksgiving, because that way, if you need to retake to hit your target score, you'll still have an opportunity to do that and get your applications completed essentially before the end of the year, because there will be an October and usually a November exam as well.
Derek, sorry, interrupting again. And I don't know, you might have just said this. Another reason I have heard for applying early, and by the way, the LEAP alums know that that's been my mantra for the last year, is to apply by Thanksgiving. And just anecdotally, we had 4 fellows who applied way before Thanksgiving. All 4 of them have been accepted to law schools with financial aid.
Amazing.
Amazing. Yes.
Congrats
and
to them.
In fact, one of them is on the call today. And but the other thing I heard about applying early is the financial aid, right? Is that there's more, is that true? Is it there's more money available, or is that not true?
That's a good question. In my experience, I mean, it could be. I think that you would have to be applying pretty late, though, to not, right? Like I think there is some truth to that. Now, I worked at a school that did both merit and need-based aid, and the need-based aid never ran out, essentially, right? So even if you applied very late and got accepted really late, if you were needy and qualified for need-based aid, you were going to get it. But merit scholarships, yeah, at some point they will stop making offers. It's always a moving target, right? Because people, obviously a lot of people turn down scholarships too, right? So sometimes money does become available again.
Okay.
But there is some truth to that. But the bottom line is, no matter what, it's always going to be more to your advantage to apply earlier, right? So best case, ideal situation is, yes, you're getting everything done by Thanksgiving,
Right.
to have the most of any option, both admission and scholarship wise.
Estuardo, did you want to add anything?
No, yeah, I completely agree. It's applying earlier is going to set you up best for scholarship.
Okay, great.
Well, now I do feel compelled, though, to say, because this question always comes up too. life doesn't always go as planned, right? Obviously. Um,
That's true.
and I work with people all the time who they're going to have everything done by September 1st. They're taking the LSAT in June, and sometimes things come up, school related, family related, health related, right? We're seeing more of that, obviously, and so they have to postpone taking the LSAT.
Sure.
And so I will say that you want to apply when you're going to be able to submit your best application also. So there is sometimes a trade-off there, right? You do have to think about that. And in many cases, I mean, I would say in probably most cases, I don't want to overstate this, but a higher LSAT usually trumps an earlier application. So that's the other thing to keep in mind, right? So in other words, if you're not going to be able to be at your best and perform at your best because you're not quite ready for the September test, even though that's what you were hoping to do, it's okay to push it off, right? Because even if that means your application might get submitted a bit later, because if another month of preparation means 3 or 4 more points on the LSAT, that's going to make a big difference in terms of your options. So I think it's just important to note that in this whole talk, because I think sometimes the apply mantra, the apply early mantra is great. Sometimes it gets overstated, and I think people panic and then they submit when they're not quite ready to.
Right,
So
right.
it's a little caveat there. All right. So what else do I want to say about the LSAT? So related to that, you can take it more than once. Schools do take the highest score, so that's fine, but just know a couple of things. You can only take it 3 times within a year, right? So it's not something that you don't want to take it more than 3 times anyway, trust me. And I mean, the other thing too is I think it's pretty common for people to take it 2 or 3 times. I feel like the majority of people I now work with take it at least 2 times, and many take it 3 times. I think beyond that, you really have to use discretion if you're going to keep taking it, right? Like there really needs to be a good reason for it, because I do feel like at a certain point, it starts to get diluted somewhat, right? Like after 3 takes, schools can start to question not just the applicant's judgment, but also is the highest score really the one that we should be looking at? So that's just something to keep in mind. But you can absolutely retake it at least a couple of times. And I would just say, generally speaking, you want to allow for it at least 3 months of preparation is what I would probably say is the rule of thumb. Now, everyone's different, right? Some people will grasp the concepts and the different question types much more quickly. Other people spend 6 months or even more preparing for it. So again, this is why planning ahead is so important, because you're not going to know until you get in it and start taking practice tests. So you want to really start early so that you have a good idea of how long it's going to take you to master these questions, and how much assistance you're going to need, right? But I think that minimum of 3 months is kind of a good rule of thumb for your planning purposes in terms of when you're going to take it and when you need to start studying for it. Lots of great materials on LSAC's website. I think the most important thing is getting practice tests. You have to practice as much as you can. I mean, that's the only way that you're really going to not only learn the questions, but also get the timing down, because of course this is a timed exam. So often one of the biggest challenges is learning how to work through the questions quickly. So the more practice questions and more full-length exams that you can get your hands on and actually take, the better off you will be. And so LSAC provides a number of them. And I think companies like PowerScore and 7Sage, some of those LSAT prep companies, I think you can get materials from them that not too costly, I think, and they do have some free resources as well. Of course, the classes are going to be a bigger investment. But what I would say, if if you're someone that has trouble being self-disciplined and setting your own schedule and doing it all on your own, it might be worth an investment if you can swing it, because then at least you have a structured setting. Those are just some general things to keep in mind as far as LSAT preparation goes. I don't know if Cindy or Estuardo have anything to add to that or questions.
No, everything, like, I agree.
All right. Yeah. We don't, well, okay, great. But yeah, and of course, there will be an opportunity for anyone who has other questions about that. But let's keep moving down our checklist. So you've registered for your LSAC account, applied for your fee waivers if you're going to do that. You're registered for your LSAT, and you've taken it. The other thing that you now need to do separately is the writing sample. So the writing sample used to be part of the LSAT administration. Once you got through the test, you would complete the writing portion at the end of it. Now they've separated it from the test. So that's something that you have to do also at a different time and on your own. The writing sample, once you're registered for a test, you can do it as early as 8 days before you actually sit for the LSAT, and then you have up to a year after to complete the writing sample. But this is the most important thing to remember about the writing sample. They will not release your LSAT score until you've completed the writing sample. So even though you have a year to do it, you don't want to wait because you're not going to get your LSAT score. So it's really best to do it, if not in the 8-day period before the test. I think a good time to actually do it is right after the test, right? Because it's going to be a few weeks before you get your score. So that's a perfect time to get it done. And then it's in, and then your score can be released. So I actually have someone who took the LSAT last summer, was planning to retake it, but life stuff came up. And so he ended up not retaking it and then forgot about the writing sample, and the year passed. So, and his applications are ready to submit, but he doesn't have a writing sample. So he now has to sign up for the January, because there was no LSAT in December, right? When he realized all this. So now he has to wait until January, has to sign up for the LSAT in January just so he can complete the writing sample. And that basically means 2 months delay on applications that are otherwise completed. So yeah. And yeah, I mean, the writing sample, it's not difficult. It's it's a persuasive essay, basically. The scenarios, it's usually the same type of setup. The city of Los Angeles is hiring an urban planner, and they have certain criteria or goals that they want to be met. And candidate A has such and such experience and comes from, whatever background. Candidate B has these qualifications. Which candidate would you hire? Those are the types of scenarios that you get. And basically and there's no right answer either. Either one could be correct. So it's just a matter of who you think is the best one, the best case in whatever the scenario is. Providing your reasoning for why you would pick that person, supporting your decision, and then briefly addressing why the other person isn't qualified. That's essentially what you have to do. It takes about a half hour. Well, you get 35 minutes. Yeah, so not too bad. So that is that's pretty much everything as far as the LSAT goes. Now, the other piece of this that can be a little confusing is there's another element of LSAC, or arm of LSAC, called the Credential Assembly Service, or CAS. So that's the next thing on your checklist. Now, the Credential Assembly Service, this is basically the service that handles your transcripts and your letters of recommendation. So the other thing that you have to do, even though you have created your LSAC account, you've registered for an LSAT, you still have to go through this other step of registering for the Credential Assembly Service, and basically paying for a subscription to that, and that's $195. So again, that fee waiver, if you qualify, would cover all of these fees. So the credential assembly service, that's the next thing you want to remember to do. Once you do that, then you will need to request transcripts from all the schools that you've attended to be sent to the credential assembly service. Now, a couple of important things to remember about transcripts. Every school that you've attended for college credit classes, you have to list and you must request transcripts from. So if you only attended one undergraduate school, that's easy. There's only one school. But if you've transferred schools, you'll need to submit obviously transcripts from all of those. Even if you took one summer class at a community college, even if you took a class during high school, because sometimes high school students will take a class for college credit at the local college, all of those have to be requested, transcripts from all of those schools, and submitted to LSAC, to the CAS. The only ones that don't, a common question that comes up is a lot of people do study abroad programs. If you only did a semester abroad or even a year abroad, you don't have to request the transcripts from those institutions. Right? It's only if it was more than a year, and most people are only doing a semester abroad. So, but the thing with the transcripts that is also important to note is what LSAC will do when they get all of these transcripts is they will recalculate your cumulative GPA based on all of the courses that you've taken. So I point this out because sometimes people are really surprised when they see a different cumulative GPA on the report that LSAC creates and that is going to be sent to all the schools that you apply to. But if you've taken courses at multiple schools, then your cumulative GPA is going to be different than what the cumulative GPA is at the school that you actually graduated from. Sometimes, even if you only attended one undergraduate school, the LSAC cumulative GPA changes. And that's because what they're trying to do essentially is put everyone on equal footing, right? So they're using a uniform grade scale. So there may be some subtle changes, but I just point all of this out because I've worked with a lot of people where in some cases it's benefited them because the cumulative GPA went up, because the LSAT grading scale was a little different, or they took some community college classes and got A's in them. But I've had other people that got really hurt by it because they forgot about that community college course that they took 5 years ago when they were 17 years old and got a C- in, a calculus class that they probably shouldn't have been taking. So those are just some things to keep in mind about the transcript. And again, you want to take care of this as early as possible, because sometimes problems come up. LSAC, as many people can attest to, is quite a bureaucracy. And obviously they're also dealing with a lot of documents. So if you're still in school, there's no need to submit transcripts. So if you're applying next fall, for example, and you're still in school, if you're going to be a senior when you're applying, for example, you wouldn't want to request until next summer, right? Because they need to have your spring grades. But if you're finished with school and you're not re-enrolling in a graduate program or taking any other courses before law school, you can get this done anytime. So the earlier, the better. So that's the transcript part of it. And now let's see, I just want to be mindful of my time because we have a couple more important things to go through. Okay, next on the checklist are letters of recommendation, which is another important part of the process, and another one that can take a significant amount of time. So 4 most important things to remember about letters of recommendation. You need at least 2. Most schools require 2. They should be from either professors or from supervisors or employers in the workplace. Number 3, they should be from individuals who know you well and know your work well, either classroom work or work in a job. And the fourth most important point, again, the early mantra, you want to ask well in advance of when you plan to apply. So I usually say give your recommenders 1 to 2 months of notice, and that you want to have them submitted 2 to 4 weeks before you actually apply. So let's just, I'm just going to go through.
Garrett, I'm sorry, can I stop you for a question? Because this is a really good question.
Yeah.
How does LSAC view, and either you or Eduardo can chime in, how does LSAC view graduate degrees in terms of GPA? So I know you mentioned that you have, like, a lot of students have community college and four-year college, right? And then they, I guess, I don't know how they figure it out, but how do they look at graduate? Because we have a couple of
Yes.
people with masters.
A great question. I'm so glad you brought it up because I didn't have it. I just forgot about graduate work. So graduate classes or graduate grades are not actually calculated in the cumulative GPA.
Oh,
Yes.
bummer.
It's
That's a bummer
only,
because a lot of people do really well in their
Yes.
master's program.
it's a total bummer. I know because right.
Oh,
Sometimes
man.
I mean, trust me, I'm one of those people. Like I worked during college. I was struggling with sexual orientation, like all these things that affected my grades, and did much better later. But anyway, we'll talk
Okay.
about that too, because Eduardo is going to talk about addenda and how you can address things that affected your grades. So, but yes, so graduate work, it's not actually calculated. But the good news is, yes, you do have to list those institutions. The transcripts still have to go to the Credential Assembly Service, and law schools will see them. So it does get considered as part of the evaluation process. And graduate work could, especially if you did much better than college, that can actually really help, right? Because that is showing that you can actually do really well in a rigorous graduate level program. So it can certainly help. And it is something that adds value and diversity to your application, right? Because you will be part of a relatively small percentage of people in the applicant pool who has a graduate degree. So it's definitely an advantage, but it doesn't get calculated into the cumulative GPA, and so that can hurt, right? Because it's, unfortunately, even if you're 5 years out of college, the cumulative GPA is still going to carry a lot of weight, because that is the one common factor across all applicants, right? And so
Right.
to some extent, it is a comparative process. But the other thing, of course, is the horrible US News rankings is, once again, right, is the US News rankings. It's the LSAC calculated cumulative GPA that is part of the ranking. So that is the one that's going to carry the most weight in the process.
Yeah, don't get me started on a live recording about the US News and World Report rankings. We have another question. I'm sorry, and this is going back to the writing sample. So Adriana asks, she took the LSAT once in 2018. She's retaking it. She did the writing sample then. Now, if she takes the LSAT Flex, would she still need to submit another writing sample?
No, as long as there's a writing sample on file, then she doesn't need to do.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Not need to redo it.
Sorry, Eduardo, you're so far ahead of me. I see that you answered her. Sorry. Okay.
All right, we good?
We're good.
Okay. So letters of recommendation. So let me just quickly talk about each of these points. So in terms of quantity, like I said, you're going to need 2. Many schools will accept up to 3 or 4. So the question that often comes up is, well, should I submit 3 or 4? And the answer is, you should only do that if those other letters are going to, from one, you have to be confident that they're going to be strong letters, right? You only want to be submitting excellent letters. And the other thing is, are they going to add something new or something different? So in other words, you wouldn't want to send two letters from the same employer. Even maybe if you work at a law firm, example, as a paralegal or something, two attorneys writing two separate letters. I don't think that that's necessary with the with your initial application. If you're going to, so in other words, if you're going to submit more than two, try to diversify them, right? So I think a really great situation is if you have two academic ones and then the third one can be a professional one. Or maybe if you were someone who was a student leader on campus, really involved and developed really close relationships with some of the university administrators, you might have a letter from them. That's going to provide a different perspective than what a professor or an employer would provide. So just think about, just use some judgment there if you're going to submit more than what the school is asking for to make sure that they're adding value and new information. The other thing that I want to point out about this is schools do tend to prefer academic ones. So even if you've been out of school for a couple of years, it's good to have at least one if you can get it. I do feel like once you get past maybe the 3-year point, if you've been out of college, at that point, it's often difficult for people to go back and ask for letters from professors because it's been so long. And schools are more flexible in those situations. But definitely if you're still in school or a year or two out of school, try to have at least one academic, if not two academic letters of recommendation. And just really quickly on point number 2, who should be writing them? I think this is always an important point to cover, because I think a lot of times applicants think that the higher the position of the person is, the better the letter is going to be, right? Like it's going to be more impressive if they get the congressperson that they interned for, when they didn't have any interaction with the congressperson, right? So again, you want to use your judgment. You always want to pick the person who's going to know your work the best and who's going to be able to write the most detailed letter, because a lot of letters could end up being generic, and letters that come from Congress people. Well, I mean, we even would see letters from celebrities, right? Like, someone was an extra in a J-Lo video and they met, they met J-Lo, and things like that. Yes, things like this actually happen. I think, yes. So celebrities send them. And I mean, if you worked closely with the person for several months or, for an extended period of time, absolutely. But otherwise, yeah, I mean, and it's the same with professors too. I mean, I'm sure some of you went to really large universities, and sometimes it's hard to get to know a professor in really large classes, but you may have had a TA who you worked much more closely with in small sections and who knew your work much better. Totally fine. Have the TA write the letter, because they're going to write a more detailed letter than the professor. So that's just a couple of notes about thinking about who should be the writer when you're selecting them.
Derek, let me interrupt. I don't know, Estuardo, if you answered any of these on the Q&A. So someone said, but I think you talked about this, Derek, would 2 academic recommendations from 2 different types of classes be redundant?
No.
Yes. Okay.
No. So it's, yeah, I mean, I think I think this is in the handout.
Oh,
too.
sorry.
No, it's okay. But if I think one of the things that I put in the handout tips is not on this page. I think it's on the next page, but whatever. If you're having 2 professors, right? Like maybe not 2 from the political science department or 3 from the political science department, but if you took a couple of classes in French, get one from a French professor, right? So again, the more that you can just diversify them, the better. Right. So that's essentially the key there.
Oh, one
The
thing I want to ask you, Derek, because we've had, so our fellows are applying now, and some of them have had issues with their professors where they emailed them months ago, right? They gave them the deadline, and now it's literally holding up their entire application.
yeah.
They have everything else done. You know, at what point do you say, okay, I can't wait for this person, and you have to find someone else? I mean, when do you,
Yeah, yeah.
know?
Well, that's great because that was the next thing I was going to talk about was timing. Um,
Okay,
but yeah, I mean, I think that's the thing. You don't have control over this part of it, right? So the earlier you can have meetings and make the ask, the better. And in the materials, Cindy, you don't necessarily have to pull this up, but I included in this
okay,
packet that we can email you at the end. The last 2 pages are email examples, just templates that you can use, um, you know, to just as guidance as far as emailing, sending the initial email to the people that you're going to ask for letters and then follow-up emails. So I just wanted to provide some examples because I know that a lot of people have questions about how do I actually even start this process and what's the best way to ask.
mhm,
So, but yeah, I mean, the point is, let's just say again, you want to apply by October 1st, we'll say. Now, you want the letter to be submitted at least 2, if not 4 weeks before that, right? So that means September 1 is when, ideally, when you want the
wow,
letter submitted, right? So then we have to back up from there. You have to ask your recommenders at least a couple of months before that. So, and I usually say try to do it, yeah, 2 months before then. So you're giving them plenty of time. Now, but to your question, nonetheless, I mean, this happens all the time. I have people that ask 6 months in advance is right, is the initial email, and then they follow up, and then they continue to follow up. And for whatever reason, there are always going to be people that put it off, and then they get busy, and then they're not doing it. So I would say that, you know, and again, part of it depends on how far in advance you asked and how many communications you've had. But if you're at the point where it's, I don't know, let's say it's August 15th and you're wanting to get your applications in by October 1st, right? And you still don't have that letter. I think you have to start at that point. You have to start thinking about someone else, right? So that's the other thing too. Is let's this is actually really good. Let's go back to that thing about the 2 versus 3 versus 4 letters. If there are other people that could potentially write a letter, then you might want to have them sort of on reserve, right? So in other words, maybe ask, well, yeah, let me put this a different way. You can have as many letters as you want on file with the CAS, with the Credential Assembly Service, right? So another way to approach this is, if there are 5 people that you feel could write a really strong letter, and even if 2 of them might be from the same academic department, or 2 of them might be from the same company, ask anyway, right? Because then you're being proactive about this issue if it comes up. If someone ends up not writing their letter, or they're not doing it in a timely fashion, then you have those other ones that you can draw from. Because when you submit your applications via your LSAC portal, you assign the letters that you want to be sent to each school, right? So in other words, you might have 5 letters on file. They're not all going to the school. You're assigning them. So that's another thing to think about, right? Is a contingency plan is to think about the people that maybe they're not your first choice, but you have them either that you can reach out to later, or just reach out to them also at the beginning and have the letter on file so that it's there. You don't necessarily have to assign it, but if you end up in the situation where the person you really wanted never sent their letter and you have your applications ready to go, you have that other one already in there. yeah, so those are some points on timing. And then, like I said, there's, I provided some sample emails. Um, Obviously you don't want to copy those, but use them as a guide and personalize your emails as much as possible. But basically you want to make it as easy for the recommender. You want to make it as easy for them to say yes as possible, right? So you want to provide some information about why you're asking them, remind them of some of the highlights of the class or the work that you did with them. Absolutely offer to meet with them, either have a phone call or a video chat, and ask them what they need. I think it's always good to provide the resume at a minimum when you're asking someone, but also, ask them if there's any other materials that might be helpful to them. Right? Like maybe they'll want to see, they might want to see your transcript, or they might, sometimes they even ask to see a draft of your personal statement. But essentially you want to make it as easy for them to say yes as possible. So offer to meet with them, provide them whatever materials that would be helpful to them. Yeah, so those are some tips on that. And then I'm going to talk about the resume really quickly, and before I wrap up. Resume, next thing on the checklist. This is an important part of the application, and I feel like sometimes applicants don't spend as much time on it because they see the essays as much more important. But the resume is really a great document to tell your story, essentially, right? Because the wonderful thing about the law school resume is you actually can submit a 2-page resume. So you have some flexibility here. When you're applying for jobs, the rule is always a 1-page resume, right? Especially when you're just starting out in your career. And so you're being much more selective about what you include on a job resume, and you're leaving things off that might not be relevant, or maybe extracurriculars that may not necessarily be important to an employer. You might be leaving those off. All of these things are important for law schools. They want to know how you spent your time, right? So it's not just an opportunity to showcase your experience and your education and your qualifications, but it is very much also about how you spent your time, right? Because if you, and I provided a couple of resume examples in the packet, and I see that Cindy has pulled one up on the screen. But if you had to work, for example, while you were in college, if you were waiting tables, for example, sometimes people think, oh, well, waiting tables, why would I include that? That's not substantive experience. That's not relevant to law school. But it's actually really important, because if you were spending 20 hours a week working at your restaurant job while you were in college, that's 20 hours that you were not able to study or to participate in extracurriculars, right? So that's 20 hours that you had to learn to work around and to manage your time. And time management is a hugely important skill for law school, and for lawyering, right? So not to mention, every job teaches us something, right? Whether you are working as an intern in your state representative's office, or you are working in a fast food restaurant, you're interacting with a cross section of people, and these are all important skills. So know that with the law school resume, you have the flexibility to go into some detail, both in terms of all of your job experiences, both part-time and full-time, and internships, but also your involvement on campus. So you'll see in the examples that I provided how the applicants here took advantage of that. And the one that Cindy has up on there, like, this person actually worked while they were in school. So they have they separated it out. They have their professional employment on the first page, and then they put, yes, professional experience, and then volunteer work, and then put those part-time jobs at the bookstore and the phone-a-thon on page 2, and indicated there, you'll see the number of hours they worked per week. so that the admissions committee can see how many hours they were working while they were in school. And then this person also was very engaged on campus and had leadership positions. So they went into some detail on their accomplishments there, right? Now, this one, Maria, a little different. She has more professional experience. She didn't work while she was in school. So her resume only has one experience section. But she's had several jobs that fall under that. So that goes on to page 2. Not as involved in leadership and on campus, so that section is shorter. But the other point that I want to make about the resume is there are so many different ways to do resumes. And if you were to Google it, you would find hundreds of different looking resume. And it's not as if there is one right way to do it, but my philosophy on the resume is if your goal is to be a Harvard law student, your resume should look like a Harvard law student's resume. And it's not a Harvard Law School resume is no different than a UC Irvine law resume or a Penn resume or a Loyola resume, right? It's just, but my point is, you're applying to law school, so there's a look, right? It's kind of boring, quite honestly, but it's professional. It's conservative. It's a standard font, Times New Roman. Education should always come first, even if you've been out of school for a while, because you're applying to an academic program. Very easy to read, consistent formatting throughout, right? So in other words, like, if you were applying to art school or graphic design school, sure, use the colors, use the fancy fonts and things like that. But I think, for law school, these are I provided these examples because these are just classic formats. I think that they really, I've heard people say, well, shouldn't I use a different font or, make mine stand out more? But the thing is, you want to stand out because of what you've done, right? Your actual experiences, but also you'll stand out because of your professionalism. And that's what you want. You don't want to stand out because you had, green font. You want to stand out because your resume looks like a lawyer's resume, right? Like that's what you're aspiring to be here. So those are just some tips about the resume. And by the way, some schools ask for this information on the application also. They actually ask for an employment history. They asked if you worked during college. They ask for extracurricular activities. That's fine. It's redundant. That shouldn't change your resume. Because many law schools don't ask for that information. So it's best to just have it all there. And then, if the schools ask for it, you'll put that in the application form too. The last point I'm going to make about the resume, because this will actually be a good segue to what Estuardo is going to talk about, is probably one of the biggest mistakes I see with the resume is actually about the personal statement. Right? And what I mean by that is, I've read many personal statements that essentially give a rehash of the resume, or are sort of or sort of a broad biography of everything they've done. And that is essentially what the resume is for, right? So again, if you have a number of experiences, take advantage of the two. It doesn't have to be 2 pages. I'm not suggesting that. I'm just saying if you've had a lot of jobs and you've had a lot of community service and involvement, use the resume to provide that detail. And then that clears the way for the personal statement where you can write about something totally different or go into much more detail about an experience, as opposed to falling into the trap of having a short resume and then doing the broad biography and the personal statement, right? And Estuardo is going to talk a lot more about the personal statement. So I'll stop there. Happy to answer questions now or wait until later, or just answer them in the sidebar here.
Right, we do have, so, and again, Derek, I don't know if you answer this. How early can my recommendations be submitted and on my LSAC file?
Anytime. So, I mean, right, once you create the account, you can submit them, and I think they stay on file for 5 years, right? I mean, yeah, they can stay there. They can live there for quite a while.
Let me just give a brief bio and background about Estuardo. So he is currently the Executive Director of Community Programs at UC Irvine School of Law. Prior to this role, Estuardo was a founding staff member in the UCI Law Admissions Office when the school opened in 2009. First in the capacity as Assistant Director and then later as Director of Admissions. He's a graduate of Brigham Young Law School, and he also went there for college. And I remember, Estuardo, when you and I first spoke, that was a very interesting conversation as to how you ended up there. Prior to joining UCI Law, he was the legal helpline manager at the LA office of Lambda Legal, which is a national LGBT civil rights organization. Now, this I did not know. Estuardo currently serves on the LSAC Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee, and he also chairs the Pipeline Initiative Subcommittee. So, Estuardo, I know that there's no money, but if you can get LEAP some money, I would appreciate it. Thank you. Estuardo sits on the advisory boards for the Pathway to Law programs at many community colleges. As a first-generation college student, Estuardo was actually the beneficiary of a pipeline program. He has since been an advocate for pipeline and outreach programs in furtherance of educational equity and access for underserved student populations. So again, thank you, Estuardo, for being here. He's already come and talked to our LEAP fellows this last year, and I look forward to continuing our relationship, especially because we have LEAP fellows who have just applied to UCI Law. So
yes, that's awesome.
yeah.
So yes, thank you for having me here. I appreciate the time, the opportunity to come and speak. So I am going to pull up my PowerPoint and let me see, get into the slideshow. Okay. So today we are going to be talking about the other parts of the application, the statements, the addenda, and other types of essays, right? So what should we say? Like, what is the point of these essays? And so you'll notice I like to use GIFs or GIFs, however you pronounce that. So bear with me, please. So a little introduction about myself. So my pronouns are he, him, and él. I identify as a Latinx gay cis man. I'm a first generation college and law school graduate. I'm the child of immigrants, Guatemalan to be specific. I'm a native of Southeast LA. And so you might be wondering, why am I sharing this with you? Why is this relevant to my presentation or to my remarks with you today? The reason I'm sharing that with you is because this is how I navigate the world. And as we talk about personal statements and your diversity statements and other types of statements that you'll be writing, I want you to start thinking about, well, how do you navigate the world? And what have your experiences been? And how have they impacted your life? How do these different intersectional identities, experiences, how do those affect you? Because that is what is going to help you as you prepare your different statements. So why are the personal statements necessary, right? The admissions committee uses these documents to get to know applicants outside of the numbers, right? We hear all the time that like, we do not want to be judged by only our LSAT score or our GPA. And understandably, right? We understand that these are not perfect indicators of our experiences or of our abilities. But in order to do that, in order to be judged, we have to provide the committee with more. So if I'm saying that I am more than my numbers, it's important for me to tell the committee exactly why or how. Like, how am I more than my numbers? What else is there about me, right? That's on me as the applicant to share. How else is the admissions committee going to distinguish between yourself and the thousands of other applicants that the school sees, right, every year? An effective personal statement is going to help flesh you out, make you human, make the committee understand what your journey was like getting to law school, right? Regardless of where you are on the LSAT GPA spectrum, right? Like, there is a guarantee that there will be other people with the exact same numbers. Just because, like I said, if you're looking at 3,000 plus applications, some schools look at way more than that. then you can expect that it doesn't matter where you fall. Like you can have a 180 and a 4.0. There will be other 180s and 4.0s. There will be a 3.0 with a 150. It doesn't matter where you fall. There will be people with similar profiles. And so you need to stand out and put yourself in your own category, right? You need to show who you are. And that is what the personal statements will help you do. So you're trying to provide a fuller picture of your life before you came to law school, or up to this juncture where you're now applying to law school. You're sharing your story in your own words. You are in charge of your narrative in the same way that I shared with you, the things that I feel are relevant to my life experience and that define who I am. You also are in control of that narrative, right? You don't, like we've discussed, you don't want to be identified or to be thought of only as a reflection of your LSAT or GPA, and maybe and not because that's necessarily a bad thing, but just because our life is more interesting than just what we've taken in college or what we've done on the LSAT one afternoon, right? So you want to, but it's up to us. Again, I can't reiterate that. It's up to us to define that for ourselves and to think about what that narrative is that we want to put out to the world. This is the closest you're going to get to an interview. And so you want to be thinking about, yes, it's all about kind of defining myself, defining my narrative, but also be mindful of what the purpose of the personal statement is, right? It's not just like a random essay that you're writing for like on a blog, right? It has a purpose to it. It's still an essay. It's still a persuasive essay. So think about what the purpose of that is. If I'm sharing something, there should be a context for it. There should be a reason for it. How is this going to show? How is this going to help persuade the committee that's reading my application that I am a prepared applicant, that I am a good match for their school, that I can do the work? These are the things that schools are typically trying to answer. They want to know, can this person do the work? Are they a good fit for our program? Are they going to be able to take advantage of the program and do well in it? And so you're trying to show that through these experiences, right? We have LSAT, we have GPA on the side that are going to be part of that answer, but you want this to be just as, if not more, compelling than that, right?
Eduardo, can I ask you, and you might be talking about this later. So in reading some of our, some personal statements, does there always have to be, let's say you're telling a story, does there always have to be even a couple of sentences where you're tying that story into either why you want to go to law school or why you would be a good law student? Like, do you have to come out and actually say that? Or do you leave it up to the reader to make that assumption?
So I've been on committees with faculty who very much want everything spoon-fed, right? Who want to hear like, this is why this experience that I'm sharing with you is why I'm coming to law school, right? And so they want it to be very clearly outlined for them. And so I always err on the side of that, to think about the essays or the personal statements as writing to someone who has no, like, even though you know that generally it's the audience is limited, it's people that are going to be reading your application, treat it as if they have never read a personal statement before, like if they've never read an application and you want to provide them that information. It doesn't mean that it won't be received well if it doesn't have that. I read a lot of personal statements where the person doesn't outline that, and that's okay, right? But like I said, I always feel like if I'm going to tell you a way to be most effective at it, then that would be my recommendation. It's like, yes, share the experience. Kind of, a lot of people want to start off in with like, like an interesting little anecdote or story, right? Because they want to kind of grab attention, and that's great. I always recommend people to add like a line to that at the end and be like, and this experience kind of opened my eyes to the possibility of law or something like that, and then keep going, so it doesn't have to become a whole thing, if you will, but at the very least, you want to just point that out, so that, because otherwise I have heard from people on the committee who will say, oh, but it's not clear why they came to law school, so I think you just want to avoid, that.
And Derek, what's your experience with that?
Oh, So whether why law should be part of it, was that the question?
Like, like very bluntly, you know, you have this anecdote, you have this personal story. Do you come out and directly say it, or do you leave it up to the reader's imagination?
Yeah, oh gosh. I think it's often a good way to wrap up the essay, right? Like what
Okay.
I often say is think about in the personal statement being forward looking, right? Both outwardly looking and forwardly looking. And what I mean by that is many of these experiences are obviously personal experiences and ones that we go through internal sort of lessons and right, but also think about, okay, how has this now changed my perspective? Right? What's the outwardly thinking part of that? And then what's the forwardly thinking part of that, which may be, and now I want to advocate for other other immigrant yes, you know,
Yeah, fill in the
I don't want
blank. I
to,
got,
yeah,
right.
whatever. Right. Like, so I think that if it seamlessly lends itself, then yes, but you just don't want to force it, if that makes sense. Right.
Okay. Okay. Thank you.
Right. Okay. So yes. So you want to, in terms of what you're writing about, you want to be thinking about the prompts. If a lot, you know, if there is a prompt that a school offers, and start thinking about how you're going to respond. That's why I kind of introduced the topic at the beginning. I want you to start thinking about, well, like, about your journey. If there isn't a prompt, which a lot of schools don't have a specific prompt, then I think you want to be thinking about what has brought me to law school at this point. Even if, like I said, it's even if it's not a direct line in terms of like you're not going to necessarily outline, it can be an experience, as we were discussing with Cindy and Derek. It can be an anecdote, a story. That's great, but you want to still be thinking about the context of what this is for, right? Like think about what the purpose of this essay is, you know. But if you don't, like, often I hear from students, you know, and I remember when I applied to law school many years ago that I was kind of in the same situation. I was like, well, what am I going to talk about in 500 words, 700 words, but 2 pages? It's very limited. And we've had a lot of life experiences. And so what am I going to narrow that down to, right? So if you're having a hard time narrowing it down, then think about the context of what experiences have brought me to law school, because ultimately that's what you're doing right now. You're applying to law school. So it's not a totally, again, it's not a totally random essay you're just writing. There is a purpose to it. So when you're thinking about, you know, what the prompts are, what you're going to write about, be mindful that the statement should always be about you, right? And because you are the one that's introducing yourself to the law school community, you're the one that's you're advocating for yourself. And so a lot of times people get caught up in writing amazing personal statements about their grandmother or their you know, their great grandfather, you know, and that's amazing, right? And it's an amazing story. And what that leaves the committee thinking at the end is like, wow, you know, if that grandmother was applying to law school, then we would absolutely admit her, right? Because that is who you've got, who you focus the statement on. And so it's okay to allude to discuss a relationship with someone that has been a mentor, that has been helpful to you, but always bring it back to yourself. Bring it back to you, because you're the one that's applying to law school. It's not that person, right? Don't sell yourself short. Think about what you're bringing to the law school. I think a lot of times we tend to, at least I did when I was coming up, when I was growing up and applying to schools, I tended to devalue the experiences that I had because I didn't think that they were impressive, right? I didn't think, oh, well, I did not go intern at the White House or in Congress. I did not do this. I did not have this high-powered job before going to law school. So to me, I did not value that. Think about, realize that law schools are not looking for applicants that all look the same, that all bring the same experience. We want to assess you based on what you've done with the resources that you had and the opportunities that were available to you. And so think about that and think about what you were able to do, you know, and give value to what you have done, right? And even if it has nothing to do with the law, don't undersell yourself. don't devalue your experiences. Like some people have to be, there's people that have been translating for their parents and navigating complex transactions at the bank with the utilities since you were like 5 years old. That's great experience, negotiating with the landlord for your parents. Some people have been taking care of small children, their siblings. They've been taking, those are valuable experiences. You've learned, you've gained resilience. You've earned grit in that process. So value that, because that is important and schools want to hear that. So don't feel that because if your resume doesn't look like someone else's, that somehow that's not valid, because that's not true. And so you want to think about your experiences, and it requires some introspection. It really requires you to really think about what you're bringing to the table and what you've learned from those experiences so that you can then put it down on paper. Don't worry about whether or not your statement is different from anyone else's, because it's your experiences, and your combination of experiences are going to be unique, even if they are on the surface similar to other people's, right? We understand that that most people have gone to high school, maybe they worked a little bit, then they go to college, or maybe you went straight to college. There's not a lot of deviation there. So we're not holding that against anyone, that there isn't this wildly different, set of experiences that people bring. So you want to value your uniqueness, you want to value who you are and what you're bringing to the table, but at the same time, you don't want to get cute, right? You want to understand what the prompt is, what the instructions are from the law school, and follow that, right? You're not applying to be a creative program, to a creative writing program. You're not writing to screenwriting program. You're applying to law school. And so whatever the law school is asking you to do in your personal statement, that's what you should be doing. Within those rules, so to speak, of course, be creative, share, be personal, make it your own. But don't submit something totally, outside the box that they're not looking at. Part of what schools are using your statements for are as writing samples. And they want to see if you can write a persuasive essay. And so if you are not following that, then you're not giving them the opportunity to assess your writing. Or as many opportunities, right? Because the only other thing they'll have then is maybe your LSAT essay. And so make sure that you follow what they are asking you to do. Again, the personal statement should be about you and not an essay about the law or about some other topic. I understand that there's a lot of things that are going on in the world right now, and we might want to write this very compelling statement about, the pandemic or about social justice or what have you. And that's great. But again, if you're going to do that, talk about yourself. Talk about how it impacts you, what role you play or want to play in that. If you just write an essay about a topic that has that is not personalized, then you've missed an opportunity for the committee to really know your experience, your life, who you are, and what you're bringing as a person. I like to give the example of everyone riding the same bus, right? Like a lot of times we think like, oh, well, what path have I been on? Has my path been too long, too different from everyone else's? Don't worry about that. I compare it to taking a bus, right? If you get on the bus at Union Station, and the one that goes out to Santa Monica, I think it's the 4 from when I was growing up. You're going to get on the same bus, and some people will get off, in different places, right? You might take a break and have lunch in mid-city. You might get back on and then get off again, closer to Venice, whatever. And then eventually you make it to Santa Monica. Other people get on the bus and they don't get off until they get to the beach. And that's fine. Everyone is taking the bus and everyone has their own journey along the way. Regardless, everyone is getting there. You are all there now. You're at that brink of law school. So don't worry about how long or how quickly you got there. So in terms, again, and Derek alluded to this earlier, you don't want to use valuable space because in most cases, if not every case, there's usually a word limit, a page limit to your personal statement. You don't want to use up that space just repeating what is in your resume. So I agree with him that it is better to be inclusive of activities you want to highlight in the resume. And that way you're not just relisting them in your statement. You want to, if your accomplishments, if your experiences from your resume are what you want to talk about, because maybe that is what brought you to law school, right? And that's okay. then pick one or two of those and discuss them more meaningfully as part of your personal statement. But don't kind of just don't narrate a list, because like I said, they can see your resume, and that's enough. That's plenty. You also want to be thinking about your tone in your personal statement. And all of us have this, and what I mean by that is, will the committee want you as their student or a classmate after reading your application? Think about how you write. The best example I like to give is text messages, right? How many times do we not send a text message where we're joking and the person that receives it does not at all take it as a joke, right? It's because it's very hard to get tone correctly when you're writing. And so what I suggest is to ask other people that know you to read it, and to read it not necessarily for editing purposes, we'll talk about that in a second, but to just read it to see how you're coming off. Like, does this sound like me? Does this sound like my personality? Am I coming off the way I want to come off in my personal statement? From the writing, would you be excited to meet yourself, right? Is this someone that you sound like, oh, wow, this person sounds, I sound nice or interesting or funny? Or am I coming off as like braggadocious and, like obnoxious, right? So you want to make sure that you are aware of how it's coming across to others. And the best way to do that is to write it with enough notice, with enough time that you can ask others for their input. Let's talk a little bit more about the optional statements, right? First of all, in my opinion, optional is not really optional, because the more you're sharing about yourself, the better the committee can assess you and have more to go on that is not just your numbers. So with the optional addenda, let's start with those. Addenda that explain grades should not be optional. Or for that matter, the LSAT score. If there are any extenuating circumstances that will explain your grades or your LSAT, you need to share that, because the committee will not be able to guess what that was, right? Like, and what I mean by that is, for example, if you have a quarter or a semester in school where your grades just tanked, and the committee is going to be left wondering what happened here, like what's going on. Yeah, some people might guess in your favor and give you the benefit and say, oh, maybe they were sick, maybe they had an emergency with family. Others might just assume that you decided to party hard that semester or that quarter. And so you don't want to leave it up to someone else to figure out or to guess what your narrative is. You need to explain that. You need to explain what happened, not offer up excuses, but just offer an explanation. Did you want to? I thought I saw you. But
Actually, Estuardo, I want to ask about that, because again, the LEAP fellows all just took the LSAT. They took it in September, then a lot of them took it again in November. If your score goes down from September to November, is that something that you need to explain in an addendum? Addendum.
Yeah, I think generally it's going to be something that if the drop is significant, and by significant I mean generally more than 5 points, then I think it's worth explaining. Otherwise, the committee, because they are working, the committee is familiar with the LSAT and how the grading works. They'll understand that that's a relatively within 5 points is usually a fairly normal deviation. So, but if there is a reason anyway, right? Even if it is within the 5 points, but if for example, like which I know happened at UCI a couple of years ago, the fire alarm went off in the middle of the LSAT. If something like that happened, or you were like on your deathbed but decided to still show up and take it, those are things you should explain. What I mean by explaining is just explaining the circumstances. I think, if you're just not happy with your LSAT score, if you're just not happy with your GPA, but there really wasn't anything affecting those things, I don't think it's a good idea to just write something to say, because most of us would love to have a higher LSAT score, right? Unless you have that 180 score, pretty much everyone wants a higher score. Pretty much everyone wants a higher GPA. So unless there's something like an extenuating circumstance that affected those things, I don't think it's necessary. But if there were, absolutely, I think you should.
And then if they are applying to a school where they are not the median and they're maybe in the 25% or below, is there any need to do an addendum?
I think just for the sake of doing one, like the committee will see what the numbers are,
Right.
right? So you don't
Right.
need to offer an explanation for that. I think again, it goes to whether or not there was something that impacted that. I think if you want to kind of advocate for yourself, kind of like, hey, I have ability, I have I can do this, notwithstanding my grades. I think you can do that in a different way, maybe through a diversity statement or one of those a challenge statement, which we'll get to in a moment, where you can address that better. But the addendum, I think, should really be for for explaining something like circumstances, as opposed to just kind of like a general advocacy.
Right.
I'll say, if that makes sense.
That makes sense.
So if the committee doesn't know about something, they won't be able to consider it. They want to assess, like I said, the questions they're trying to answer are can you do the work, and are you a good fit, right? Are we a good match for each other? And so anything that you can provide that will answer that for them will be helpful. Again, you want to show them that you can, and you want to advocate in the different ways that you have. The optional statements, like I said, will help you do that. Conduct issues, on the other hand, are, well, like I said, generally optional is not optional, but conduct issues, those types of statements are definitely not optional. You need to explain that in an addendum. In most cases, law schools will ask you a specific question about conduct. And what I mean by conduct is academic conduct, like if there's been an academic irregularity, if you've been put on academic suspension, if you've been, cited for academic dishonesty, integrity, anything like that, that needs to be addressed. You need to bring it up affirmatively, and you need to add an addendum to explain what happened. Similarly, if there have been any kind of criminal situation, you want to explain those in an addendum. And with those, you want to be as clear and to the point as to what it is. It's not helpful for the committee. The committee is not trying to, it's not a gotcha moment, right? They're not trying to like, aha, you did this and now you're out, right? That's not why they're asking you. They're asking you this because they want to assess whether or not, you will be able to move on and pass and be admitted into the bar. And in 99% of the cases, you will. So this is not a disqualifying question. It's really not. Like I said, in very few cases will the committee say, "Wow, this person cannot be admitted," right, to the bar. And so the question is just so that they are clear on what happened, because you're going to have to account for that when you apply to be admitted into the bar 3 years later. And as your law school, they play a role in that. And so the law school needs to understand clearly what you did, explain what happened, how you took care of the situation. Did you pay restitution? Did you serve time? Whatever you did, account for that, right? Sometimes I see statements where people try to be slick and they kind of try to write like the criminal code, and but they never say what they did, right? And so just you're going to get a follow-up call or a follow-up email from the committee asking you to clarify. And so just be to the point. If there is an explanation, offer it, but just say it, right? Don't try to beat around the bush. Don't try to hide it. Don't try to use legalese to try to like, these are lawyers that are reading your application. They're not, that won't help you. And if anything, they find that frustrating because you're not really owning up to what happened. When in doubt, it's better to disclose. Like some schools have different phrase their questions differently from each other. We all try to be fairly consistent, but sometimes, it's the nature. We're not bound by any federal national rule that says we have to ask the question in a specific way. So if you have any questions, any doubt, it's better to just disclose. Even if you think, oh, this was sealed when I was, because I was a minor, whatever, I think it's better to just disclose it. It's confidential. Only the people that need to read your application are reading it. So I don't know if Derek wants to add anything to that, but I can't emphasize enough that you need to disclose.
I'm answering questions, so
okay.
I think you covered it.
Okay, good.
Thank you.
Yeah. So diversity statements. So let's talk about these. Diversity and or obstacle or hardship statements can provide additional insight to the committee about your life, right? Like we want to talk about ourselves, about our bringing our full selves to law school, because that's what we're doing in essence, right? And so you want to be able to talk about that in some way. Are they necessary, right? Some people wonder, well, my personal statement talked a lot about the challenges I faced, or about the diverse experiences I've had, or my diverse identities. They're optional, obviously. They are not required, but they can be helpful if you're thinking about how to differentiate between your personal statement and a diversity statement. Then think about, what I was talking about at the beginning, where I gave you these different kind of identities, for lack of a better word, or experiences that I've had, because that is one way for you to kind of like separate them out and maybe think about, okay, can I approach this? Can I talk about a different part of myself or about my life? Or can I talk about perhaps you know, a different, how these things have impacted me, right? Diversity, one of the reasons we value diversity, and one of the reasons that I'm talking to you about thinking about your experiences, is because we are not looking, law schools are not looking for diversity just for the sake of diversity, right? We're not just saying, oh, it's nice because we should have, we should have, the legal profession representative of different people with different experiences. But it's not just for like a Benetton ad, right? It's not, I don't even know if anybody knows Benetton, but, like, but it's not just for that. So they can take a nice picture. It's because the experiences, the insights, the resilience, the grit, all those things that you're bringing behind that identity, and what that means, and how that will enrich your classroom experience and the classroom experience of your classmates, and how that will enrich the profession. So there's a real value to that. And so think about, if you're writing in writing your diversity statement, it's not enough for me to just, submit an essay that says, oh, you should admit me because I'm Latinx, or because I'm first generation, or because I'm gay. It should be, this is how those experiences have affected my life. This is how they have either propelled me towards law, or maybe these are the obstacles I have faced as a result of these identities or these experiences, or maybe this is how I have benefited, right? It's different for everyone. And so I certainly don't want, it's about your perspective and how this has affected you. And so you want to make sure that if you're writing a diversity statement, which, like I said, I think you absolutely can, to make sure that you are not just repeating what you've said elsewhere, because then it can just be, so if you've already talked about one aspect of your life, your identity, your experience, in your personal statement, then yeah, be thoughtful about what else you're going to write in a diversity statement, so that it's a different perspective or from a different lens, if that makes sense. What should I talk about? Again, how has your background affected your educational and professional opportunities? This could be in a good way, this can be negatively, right? How will this impact your work? How has it fueled your interest, your passion? How do you think these experiences that you're bringing are going to impact the profession, right? How are they going to make it better? Those are ways that I think can be show thoughtfulness behind a diversity statement. And again, if you've already discussed your background in the personal statement, consider a different aspect, right? Think about intersectionality, or from a different perspective. So logistics now, let's talk about your statements and how you're going to craft this statement, right? Now that we've talked a lot about like how, the substance, what you're going to talk about in it, now how, right? First of all, you want to remember that you need to be professional when you're writing your statement. You're applying to a professional program to be a lawyer, essentially. And so you need to write like one, or as close to it as you can get, right? And so you need to proofread. These are not essays that you should write like in one afternoon and just submit your first draft. You should really be looking at them. You should be asking others to look at them. You really want, like I said, we already discussed one reason why someone should look at it, for the tone, but you also want someone that can have like an eagle eye and really like look at the editing and look at your grammar and all those things. In terms of, the guidelines, schools give you their guidelines very clear. LSAC will also give guidelines often on the statements, but at the minimum, schools will usually tell you, if they're not being super picky about like the margins or anything like that, they're definitely going to give you word limits, page limits, other instructions. Follow those, right? Sometimes I feel like students see them and they're like Regina George, and they're like, oh, that's not a real rule. It is a real rule. And there are people on the committee who will dock you, so to speak, for points, for lack of a better word. We don't use points, at least not at UCI, but they will dock you for going over the limit. on the page or word limit. So follow those. They're there for a reason. If you don't follow those rules or those word limits, page limits, they will notice, and some of them will straight up take out, use the word count on their computers. Others will just, like I have a good sense of what, our word limit looks like. 750 words is about 2 pages, right? And so if someone has 3 pages, then I know that they've clearly gone over. And so you want to make sure that you don't get noticed that way, because what does that tell someone when there's a word limit, page limit, and you don't follow it, right? You're telling them that either one, you saw that and you decided that that did not apply to you, right? That you are the snowflake that does not need to follow that rule, or that you didn't read the directions, right? And either way, that is not a good look. That is not how you want to come across to the committee. So make sure that you follow those. You want to have enough time in your writing so that you can actually have it looked at by other people, as we discussed with the tone. You want professors, TAs, you want other people to read your statements and to give you feedback, right? Like, so amongst your friends, if there's one that is that annoying person that edits your text messages, that is who should be looking at your personal statement, because they can give you good feedback on the editing, right? Take that feedback at the same time with a grain of salt. Consider the source. Like if someone is telling you like, oh, it's not a great idea to talk about, like being, gay in your statement. Think about like, well, why are you telling me that, right? And think about what, like always take feedback with a grain of salt. I think editing feedback you should always listen to, because, it's editing. But when it comes to the substance, at least be mindful of who might be giving you that feedback and why, and what their own reasons for question that at the very least. Again, grammar and writing. Remember that people on the admissions committee is usually made up at least partly by faculty. And they're going to be looking at it from the context of like, oh, in 9 months, this person is going to be in my class. And do they want you as a student? Are they going to like your writing enough to say, oh yeah, this is someone that I don't mind, editing their work, because, they can write. When you come to law school, you are going to be retrained on your writing so that you become a good technical legal writer, right? So, but in order for that to happen, you need to have a good foundation of basic writing, for lack of a better word. That is something that the law school cannot take the time to teach you, because the assumption is that you already have that foundation. And so the committee is looking at these statements, because schools don't ask you for writing samples. This is the closest you get to a writing sample. So you need to make sure that you are submitting a good writing sample. Remember, you want to be clear, you want to be concise, and you want to be persuasive, because that is, you're trying to get everything in. You want to be clear about what you're trying to say. You want to be concise, keep it to the word limit, and you want to be persuasive. Ultimately, the essay is trying to advocate on your behalf. Any questions? We're happy to take questions. We have a few minutes left, and I know that Derek is answering some in the chat, and I'm happy to email a copy of this out. So I will send a PDF version of this to Cindy so that she can distribute it out after also.
Oh, perfect. Wow, that was a lot of amazing information. Again, thank you so much. Derek and Eduardo, if you could stay on really quick, and then everybody else, please go and enjoy your day. And thank you. Happy holidays.